Good evening. For those of you who've just arrived, welcome to Austin. I look out at a crowd like this, and I remember my grandmother's assessment of the fundamental human problem. She said, "People are great, but what do you do with them?" She had this theory. She said, "This is why we have canasta." Her theory was that we're irresistibly drawn to each other, but we are unprepared for impact. And this is why we have card games. This is why we have dancing. This is why we have cooking together and Tupperware parties and flash mobs. This is why we have events like this. So for the next couple of days, we're going to be chewing on some challenging questions about corporate culture. And not only are we going to get ideas about how to make our businesses more successful, how to make our communities more powerful and effective, and how that makes us better people at work and helps us make a difference in the world. But the real payoff is you're going to make friends with some of the most thoughtful and conscientious people that I know, and everybody here is working to make the place where they work a great place to work. And we're doing it because we really believe in this. We believe in diversity, because when you have a wide range of opinions in the room, you get better ideas. We believe in inclusion, because whenever people feel trusted, when they're brought into decisions early, we get more durable decisions and more people who are bought in. We believe also in motivation and engagement, because we know that when people really show up, really great stuff gets done. And I think we believe in this not just because it makes our businesses profitable. I think we believe in it actually because it is the right thing to do. I think we believe in it because deep down we're convinced that inclusion and diversity and engagement really are their own ends. They are ends in and of themselves. And at a time when the wider world needs more tools for civil society, at times whenever people are looking to figure out what is the relationship between business and the rest of my life, then at these times, these conversations that we're having among us really pay off. And I hear something of what's coming whenever we get together and talk. Now, we all know the challenges that we're up against, that no matter how brilliant our vision is, it still has to deliver a return on investment. And it has to deliver it for investors that are often very short-term focused, in an environment where people just take scarcity and cutthroat competition and relentless comparison and all of these assumptions that go under the loose heading of capitalism for granted, as if they simply describe the world. And I think it's a great time for us to be having this conversation, because when I talk to some of the most successful capitalists I know, there's a sense that the ground is shifting. There's a sense that some of the things that we put up with that have resulted in so much inequality and so much damage to the environment are just not things people are going to put up with indefinitely. And what they see is that there's an opportunity now for people looking for things that might work better. And I feel like some of the ideas that we discuss and are experimenting with in our companies are pointing to big opportunities for large groups as we move forward. So the Culturati group has asked me tonight to reflect on what are we really talking about when we talk about culture. And they said, why don't you talk as an economist and a philosopher? So I'm going to do that. First, I'm going to give you the economist's take. Then I'm going to give you the philosopher's take. And then we're going to talk about capitalism. So let's do it. First, from an economic perspective, it seems to me that the strongest case to be made for the questions that we're asking and the innovation and experiments that you're doing is that it actually makes a difference in the new economy that we're in. If you want a really good summary of how the economy has changed and the pressures that puts both on business and broader society, I recommend a book by Ryan Avent. He's a senior editor for The Economist, and the book is called A Wealth of Humans. And he's looking at what happens at those periods in history where technology changes and suddenly makes labor more plentiful relative to the other factors of production. And what happens then at work and what happens in society. And one of the things that's happening for us right now that all of you are very well aware of is that the business models that are delivering the largest margins right now are the ones where creativity and innovation is at the center of things, which means that not only the talent that you're attracting to your organizations, but the way in which people are wired together to work is making a huge difference. That culture is the principal asset of businesses that innovate, and it should be the primary focus of those of us who are leading these organizations. And Avent talks about this shift to an economy in which culture is the driver of value, and how that changes how business models can be formed, as well as the way in which people are coordinated and motivated in this kind of environment, because the old models don't work. And we're all here because we are trying to figure out what actually does. So as we talk to our board members, as we talk to senior leadership in our companies, as we talk to other people about changes that we're trying to make our businesses sustainable and profitable, it's worth looking at what we're learning about the way in which people work in these culture-centric business models. One of the big concerns that we have is, how are we going to inspire people to give to this enterprise the kind of creativity and commitment that it takes to come up with fresh ideas on a regular basis? How do you get that kind of engagement from people? This is a principal question of motivation. And one of the things that Daniel Pink writes about in his book Drive is, as we move from tasks that can be done with adrenaline to tasks that require creativity and insight, that the kind of motivation that works shifts. People are not going to respond to a steady stream of extrinsic motivations, bribes, and threats in the way that they might if all they had to do was hit harder or run faster. In fact, what we have to do in order to get more of people is offer them richer fields of motivation. And that's something I know a lot of you think about all the time. I think it's very clear that when we can connect people with things that they care about at a deep level, when we can connect people with things that engage more of their imagination and more of their heart, that we get more out of people because we're giving them an opportunity to do something they want to do anyway. And they feel like they have the support of a community and perhaps of the assets of our company to go make a difference they care about making. I think, though, that there's another theory that's emerging about motivation that's also potentially yeasty when it comes to helping make our businesses more profitable. And that is the theory that people will be fully employed no matter what you do. That is, when you bring people into your environments, they will find a way to use every bit of themselves because they can't help it. I experienced this whenever I took some tests a few years ago as a trial for the Acton School of Business with the Johnson O'Connor Foundation, which administers the Highland Skills and Interests Inventory. They said, we're especially concerned about people who have 2 strong skills as opposed to just 1. The people with 1 have an easy time in the job market. They can find something that fully engages their peak strengths, and they don't have to worry about it. But the people with 2 can't find an easy, off-the-rack solution. And they're the people who wind up, in many cases, being entrepreneurs or finding jobs that let them create their own work because they're trusted. She says people who have 3 usually wind up robbing liquor stores. She goes, because there's really no way for them to employ all of that talent. So I think one of the challenges that we have as leaders is keeping our eye on the folks that we bring in and asking the question, how much of their talent are we prepared to use? How much hospitality can we extend to them to make our work a site of experiment, innovation, and play? This word play came up in a famous essay by David Graeber in The Baffler a few years ago called, "What's the Point if It Isn't Fun?" And in this article, he looks at some of this emerging theory about how people are somehow driven to constantly explore the limits of their skill and to keep exercising them simply because it's fun to flex those muscles. And so at work, if I don't have something to do that employs those pieces of me, I will then create drama. I will process on the side. I'll set up a parallel business within my company. And if you as a leader know that's going to happen, then you have your eyes on inviting people to find opportunities to use every piece of them to serve some mission that they care about. In fact, Graeber even points out animals play, and they're not particularly purposeful, but they look for ways to flex these strengths. It may even be a property of all kinds of self-organizing systems, including crystals, perhaps even molecules and atoms, are doing these gratuitous displays of their potential, almost as if, as one writer said, it were some sort of exuberant song of praise. So what if it's true that one aspect of human nature is we will find full employment for everything that we have to do? Isn't it an interesting question for us to ask ourselves as business people? How much of the folks we bring on board are we prepared to employ? Another question that's worth asking, let me say one more thing about this. I find an instructive example of this in a story that was told to me by an EMS leader about what happened in the suburbs of Atlanta after the fire codes got so good that the firemen weren't being called out on so many fires. Instead, what the firemen did, instead of sitting around working crossword puzzles, is they went out into the community and started visiting elderly and shut-in people and repairing their stairs and making sure they took their medicine and visiting with them and checking to see if there were problems in their house. And what happened as a result was a significant decline in emergency room visits by this elderly population that more than paid the salary for the firemen. Now, where do we get that sort of value in our society, if not from the allowing people to fully employ themselves, whatever the job they're given? The other two things that are important to keep in mind here are that diversity and inclusion, we are getting more and more evidence that these ways of working pay off for companies. That having people with diverse points of view on a team, in one study by Deloitte, showed that the teams that had different life experiences came up with the go-to-market strategy faster, 4 times as often, as the teams that did not. With inclusion, there's more and more this sense that people are going to invest in decisions they help make. And so bringing in the frontline people who know the teams, the people who know the suppliers, the folks that are expected to execute any plan early on, that even a small sense that they have participated in decisions makes the execution much more likely because of their sense of ownership in it. What I'm saying here is when I think like an economist, this seems like an exciting time for the kind of cultures we're trying to build because of the emergence of more sophisticated thinking and evidence for how these particular dispositions lead to the kinds of results that we care about. So I want to suggest that the questions we be asking ourselves, perhaps at dinner tonight, and certainly when we go back to work, are where is the opportunity in my company for more people to be included in decisions so that they might be more bought in? Where's the opportunity in my company to bring people in earlier who have diverse perspectives that might give us a brilliant idea that we're not going to come up with the usual team? Where is there an opportunity for us to give people the chance to bring more of themselves to work, a little bit of trust that in fact might pay off in terms of unexpected innovation? These are good empirical arguments, and it seems to me to be the simplest story we can tell about culture today, that in a new economy that demands more from people, new motivations and richer notions of inclusion make a difference. Now, let me put my philosopher's hat on and offer you another angle on this question. And that is, if Aristotle were here, he might be startled by our use of the term culture, which is probably not one that was familiar to him. Instead, he would probably have called it custom. And what he would mean by that is the culture or custom of a group. It is simply the habit of a corporate body. So what we're talking about when we talk about culture is the habits that we have for being and working together. So let's take a look then at a way of thinking about this that might give us some rough outline of a theory of culture that might give us some places to explore. And I want to start by asking the question, or making the point that culture is always going to be grounded in what we value. And so one of the things that we value as human beings is making an impact, getting things done. And I'll put this under the heading of doing. We value accomplishment. And therefore, we undertake projects, and particularly accomplishments that express something that is important to us or solve a problem. These are things that we are bent on And I am talking to a group of people who have got very well-developed habits around building projects. So the idea here, when we're trying to create this kind of value, we create it by making sure we are focusing people's efforts and attention constructively. Look here, focus yourself here, do this next. And this focus of attention is expressed in plans and processes. And the payoff of all of this is that we are able as a group to make a difference that matters. I'm using the Greek word here in honor of Aristotle, telos, which means the ultimate good that is accomplished, the final destination of this sort of work. So when we are doing projects to make an impact, the difference that matters is the thing that accomplishes it for us. Now, I think that when I went to business school, this is pretty much what I learned. I learned a lot about how to make a difference. I learned a lot about making plans and defining processes. I learned about focusing attention and project management. But it seems that there is an even deeper value that people have that we have to take into account if we want to be effective leaders. And that is this drive for wholeness. And this is an objective of being. We want to be whole people. We want to use our whole selves. And mostly, we want to be connected to each other in a whole and healthy way. Human beings, as Jonathan Haidt says, are 90% chimp and 10% bee. I think he's a little understating the bee aspect of it. We're very much hive animals that are taking our clues from each other, and we are most satisfied when we are working together in a frictionless, effortless, joyful way. So we want to be about wholeness. And when we do this, rather than undertaking projects, wholeness is the fruit of practice. Are we practicing the kind of being that we want to become our habits? And the way we do that at work and in other aspects of our cooperation is about how we work together. And I've written down here some of the descriptions of how we work together. Who do we include? How do we talk, listen, and make decisions? What do we share and what do we conceal? How do we motivate each other? How do we share the rewards and responsibilities of our work? These are the kinds of practices that we can practice when we work together. And the kind of practices that we settle on, if we were talking to the medieval monastics, would be called a rule of life. What are the habits that govern what we do day to day and what we don't do? The habits that help us create the kind of wholeness that is the telos of our work together. And that telos here is to be fully human and to be fully human in community. Now, I put all that up on the board and I ask you, how does it feel suddenly to have that laid alongside the top line? And the answer might be startling and unexpected, but the truth is, at every job we do, in every assignment we take, every time we have the opportunity to work with other people, both of these lines are active. And the integration of these two lines, I believe, is culture. That the culture is the fusion of our plans and process to create business value and the rule of life that we observe together that gives us satisfying connection in a fully human community. That is culture. It is where these two lines intersect. Now, the challenge is there's one more element, which is that the bottom line always trumps the top one. That is, people will eventually default to the bottom line no matter how much we coerce them, no matter how much we try to scare them, no matter how much we bribe them. In the end, the difference that matters has to be rooted in our aspiration to be fully human and to be part of a rich and healthy community. So this is what we're working with whenever it comes to being leaders of culture. And as I look at this, I can't help but reflect on something that one of my friends on Wall Street said to me recently. He's created a new platform for trading derivatives that's really fast and safe. He's made a lot of money and has a good reputation. I asked him, why do you still come to work? He said, because work gives me a chance to enjoy people. And I was startled by that answer. In a way, it seems like he's answered my grandmother's fundamental problem. He's found something to do that allows him to be with others in a rich and satisfying way. And I thought for a moment about the bottom line, and what if it's true that in fact the reason we're all at work on some unconscious level is so that we might enjoy connection with other people. And this brings up a tension that exists in human life. We have both a drive for communion and we have a need for survival. We have to feed ourselves, but at the same time, what means most to us is connection with other people. And it is the way that we solve that problem, I think, that is a measure of our success as humans. Because something that we're told in a lot of business conversation is that those two objectives compete with each other. And it seems like what the challenge that we are willing to take on as leaders of culture is to find a way to let them complement each other. In fact, to find motivations that are so deep that they simultaneously allow us to achieve the two important goals of being human. I also can't help but think of the example that the medieval monastics give us, and let's consider the way they solved this problem. They went out into the desert with the principal idea of experiencing the divine in human community. That was their goal. They believed that by living together peaceably, that by living together with a rule of life in which they pray and forgive each other, and work and eat and live and sleep together, that they would come to know fully human community. And so that's what they did. And out of that intention, they planted gardens and vineyards, and they built houses and schools, and they served the poor people and the pilgrims who showed up. And out of this daily practice of delight in each other, they became prosperous. For them, it was simply all one thing. And I don't tell you that because I think you need to run your business like a monastery. I give you that because it feels to me to be some particularly brilliant example of what's possible in human life that both makes a difference that matters and creates accomplishments, but does so out of a principled ground of enjoying being with other people in a way that is wholehearted and in a way that lets us be connected in community. And so it seems that there is a lot of opportunity here. Why do we fall short? Why is it that so often our cultures don't seem to deliver either the top line or the bottom line in the way that we imagine they could? One reason is because the incentives that we offer our employees reflect a relatively narrow notion of what a good life is. The idea that we are giving people purely material incentives, when in fact the work that we're asking them to do is work that requires their whole self, shouldn't be so surprising. And the science on this is mounted to the point that most leaders have now moved on to thinking of the harder problem. What actually gives people a sense of connection to the mission? What gives them the sense of being able to enjoy people at work? What gives them the opportunity to play in a way that is fully realized celebration of their gifts and talents? It seems like another challenge that we face is sometimes we haven't yet given them work worth doing. It is worth thinking, what difference is all the effort that I'm putting in your shop making? Sometimes it's because I don't see the connection to the customers that I'm helping, or I don't see the way in which the mission is coming about because of my effort. Sometimes it's simply because the things that we're doing don't actually create any value that we can see. Or even worse, that we're engaged in competitive practices in which we feel like we're actually taking things away from other people. And you can't blame people for not being motivated by that. It's exciting to me to think back of examples of companies, many of them are in this room, that inspire me, that were very clear about the value they were creating. In the early days, Dell's mission to make the internet accessible to everyone excited people, customers and employees alike. It's exciting at Deloitte when they talk about how they are effectively for the people who work there to develop their potential, and that all this consulting brilliance that they share with the world is a byproduct of their own efforts to learn and enjoy each other. If you go to Wheatsville Co-op, you will get a long discussion with people about how profit is actually a means to an end. And the end of that food co-op, the only one in Texas, is to build a business that exhibits kindness, hospitality, and generosity makes food affordable for people, and builds an alternative economy. It's all over the store, and the people who work there, who are all paid a living wage, they will let you know this is the kind of business that's about something where I am made a better person simply by being here. I think it's also true at the seminary where I work. Although our mission is very clear, the way to get there is constantly evolving as we hear from our stakeholders different things that they need. But we are a community that is committed to this higher purpose. We lunch together almost every day, and we enjoy each other so much that we have the flexibility to form fast teams and solve problems and pivot and change our approach as often as we need. And I have never worked with a team that felt so healthy and creative and exciting. It's kind of like I used to hear people talk about Silicon Labs as a company that is so invested in the joy of engineering creativity that when the market challenged them, they were able to pivot quickly because of just the bonds of affection that were among their team members. So sometimes I think we fall short of the full potential of our work together because the cost of working at companies and the effect that it has on us is too much to bear. I ask you this, what if you had to do an environmental impact study on your culture? How does it affect the people who aren't working there when your employees go home at night? How are they treating their families? How are they able to contribute to their community? What are the ways in which working at your company is a practice for becoming the kind of person that I aspire to be? And for me, this is the greatest gift that those of us who offer economic opportunity to others can give them, is the thought of who do you become and what kind of person do you become by following the habits of this company, by being part of this culture. And although I'm not one who thinks that we should ban cigarettes and gambling and cable news, I do think that we're all getting to the point to where we recognize that unless we restrict our intake to small doses, they begin to change us in ways that we don't want to be changed. And the same is certainly true of some of our companies. Which brings me to the last hat that I want to wear. How big is the opportunity we have in this conversation about corporate culture? Because it seems that the moment is coming, a moment that only happens once in an age, where suddenly we step back and we see that the economic system that we thought was as solid as the law of gravity is under such crisis and pressure that we can actually imagine an alternative to it. And what might that be? It seems to me that one of the opportunities that we have is to reflect on just being realistic about this. Because these conversations feel naive and disconnected if we have them apart from the economic reality that our shareholders are still expecting results, and that our investors may not yet have moved into the age of Aquarius. And although we can go and make business plans that are based on good human psychology and experiments that we're running at our work that help prove to us what's possible, we have to understand that a lot of people still function the way a business friend of mine does when he said to me the other day, "Yes, Stephen, you talk a lot about empowering people, but I like to hire timid people. I like people who are scared. I like people who are afraid to speak up. I like people who are scared of losing their job. I really like people who are still looking for the love their parents never gave them. Because those people will work hard. And they may not be the most creative folks, but you can hire a lot of them because they don't cost as much. And you can push empowerment all you want, but that's an unproven model. My model built the pyramids. And the fact of the matter is that people don't really want as much freedom as you think they do. People would much rather trade away the terror of being responsible for their power for a little bit of suffering that feels familiar. Thank you, but I'll stick with the culture that I've got. I had to laugh, but I also had to think it's going to take a lot of experiments to bring around the folks who are still operating as if all of these things are just part of nature. Capitalism is not actually part of nature. It's a decision we've made about how power works among us. It's a decision we've made that started way back when the commons were enclosed and the farmers were pushed off land and moved out of subsistence so they could go work in the factories because that served other people's interests. And nowadays, even though free enterprise is the greatest expression of creativity in business that I can imagine, the rules by which we play the game are up for reconsideration. And I think we should all challenge ourselves to ask, what kind of game do we want to be playing? What's the kind of game that actually demands more of us, that doesn't allow us to externalize and lazily operate as if price signals were the only thing that mattered? This is the question that's worth asking when a bunch of smart people are in a room together. I think about this, those of you who are visiting to Austin, because we actually have created something that seems very special in this city. And I know those of you who fly on planes next to people from Austin are tired of hearing this. But indulge me to say what makes our culture here unique is really two things. The first is that people are very quick to share their social network with you, which is one of the reasons why this city has grown so prosperous so fast. But the other, and perhaps often less appreciated aspect of Austin culture is that we expect you to contribute when you get here. When you talk to someone from Austin, one of the first things they'll say when you tell us that you're moving here is, what do you want to get involved in? What do you want to contribute to the community? Where can we plug you in? What's the difference that you want to make? And when people from other places hear this, they sometimes step back and say, is this real? Do you really have an expectation? And then suddenly they're excited because we actually want to live in a community that expects that kind of thing from us. I think that's the difference we want to make. There are changes that are trying to happen, and the work you're doing to build cultures in your business, the attention you're giving to what really motivates people, the aspirations you have to build a business that you are proud of, not just because it makes a difference in material terms, but because it actually makes people better in ways that make society better. That's why I'm here. That's why I follow you. And that's the learning I think we can all do together. The medieval monks created a great deal of prosperity, and they made business that created culture that was durable and solid and profitable and healthy and joyful. And towards the end of their run, if you read Tim Cahill's book, How the Irish Saved Civilization, you get the end of the story, which was that the Vikings, who lived by the sword, swept into Ireland and looted the monasteries, killed monks, scattered others. And still I ask the question, if you were sitting outside this story and you got to decide which life experience is going to give you the greatest satisfaction, would you be a Viking or a monk? We have an opportunity to use the glorious, hidden, still emerging, mysterious potential of human beings to make businesses that are great. And we don't yet know what our economy will look like whenever we free our imagination to let some of these experiments that you're already running, imagine them as the structure of what comes next. I am eager to see how that happens, and I look forward to the conversation with you in the next couple of days. Thank you.